My name is Rachel Caldwell. I'm 36, and most people in this room don't know I exist. They know of me, perhaps, as a code, a rumor, a set of footprints that somehow appear in two countries at once. But not by face, not by name. That's by design. I was sitting in row 3, seat 4. No uniform stripes, no ribbons. Just plain fabric and silence. My name wasn't printed on the ceremony program. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't expected. Not by anyone, especially not by the man seated up front in the VIP section, Colonel Henry Caldwell, retired. My father. He didn't recognize me. Not yet. Not until the moment that shattered everything. The podium microphone popped once sharp. Then a different voice, low and steel-edged, cut through the air like a clean break in bone. "We need Ghostwalker in the room." There was no explanation, no spotlight, just those 6 words. And suddenly, the entire row of officers stood. My father turned, confused, searching. Then his eyes locked on mine, and in that instant, his posture changed. He rose stiff and silent, because every other decorated soul in that room already had. That was the moment the man who had called me useless for decades finally stood for the daughter he never saw coming. I grew up in a house where silence was not peace, it was punishment. My mother died when I was 10. Lupus, they said. I remember the medications, the long naps that turned into days in bed, the way her voice started to disappear before she did. After that, the house lost its softness. My father filled the space with military order, boots at the door, meals scheduled to the minute, conversations reduced to directives. He wasn't violent, not the kind people could point to, but he could disappear behind his eyes when disappointed, like whatever he was looking at had ceased to exist. That I learned early was his truest form of control. I used to wait for him at the edge of the hallway, clutching books hoping to share something. A new word I learned. A sentence in French I'd practiced. Once I managed to recite an entire weather report in Italian, cobbled together from shortwave frequencies I picked up on a broken radio I found near the fire station. He didn't look up, just muttered, "That won't save your life in a foxhole." Another time, I handed him a copy of my essay on semantic code switching in war zones. He flipped through the first page, then said, "Does it include anything on field maneuvers?" When I said no, he placed it back down like it was junk mail. By age 11, I stopped trying. I hid dictionaries under my bed, taped foreign verb charts to the inside of my closet door, trained myself to mimic accents while brushing my teeth. I learned Russian from a janitor who once fought with the Red Army, and Portuguese from a nurse at my middle school who didn't think I was strange for asking how to say resilience. In that house, silence had a structure. It was tactical, calculated. The absence of words meant you were being watched, judged, measured. My father believed in efficiency, not curiosity. He trusted strength, not nuance. He praised obedience, not interpretation. He was the kind of man who polished his medals weekly, but didn't know what books his daughter read. By the time I reached high school, I could speak 5 languages with fluency and understand 3 more well enough to detect sarcasm. But I never spoke them at home. At home, I said yes, sir, and no, sir, and moved through the rooms like furniture that breathed. Sometimes at night, I imagined what it would feel like to be spoken to in a language I didn't have to translate. One where recognition didn't come after performance. One where my voice didn't have to be quiet to be safe. I didn't have that language then, but I was building it one accent, one idiom, one stolen phrase at a time. And I knew deep down that someday I'd make someone like him stand up and listen, even if he didn't understand a single word I said. I got my acceptance letter on a Tuesday. It came in a plain government-issued envelope with heavy ink and a corner crease, like it had been handled by a dozen hands that knew how to hide significance in plain sight. Full scholarship, Department of Defense Linguistics Program, ROTC commitment attached. It wasn't just a letter, it was a lifeline. One I had carved out of secondhand textbooks and radio static. No tutor, no guidance counselor, no family contact, just me decoding a world that had never once tried to make room for my voice. That night, I placed the envelope on the hallway table, where my father always dropped his keys. I imagined him seeing it, reading the header, finally understanding what I had done, what I had become, that he might just once say something human. He walked in around 8:20, still in uniform, mud on his boots. He saw the envelope, picked it up, scanned the first few lines. Then he folded it in half, sharp casual, and set it down beside the grocery list like it was a receipt. "Guess you'll be up to 10 languages by the time they're done with you," he muttered, then poured himself a glass of orange juice and disappeared into the next room. No congratulations, no questions, no flicker of pride, just a grunt and a dismissal. I stood there alone in the hallway, shoes still wet from my walk home, realizing that the man who raised me would never ask what it cost to reach that point, what it meant to do it alone. I didn't argue. I didn't chase his approval. Not anymore. I chose a school 6 states away, far enough to breathe, close enough that I could still pretend I hadn't left for good. ROTC was grueling physically, emotionally, but I found myself thriving in ways no one had prepared me for. Between drills and combat simulations, I built linguistic databases, trained myself in dialect recognition under stress, rewrote outdated field manuals into simplified syntax for humanitarian zones. I wasn't just translating. I was anticipating, filtering intent through culture, predicting tension before it broke. They didn't teach that in a standard program, but I had already lived it. No one from home ever called. Not once. Some nights, walking back from the library with my arms full of tapes and field notes, I wondered if he even remembered I existed. If he still imagined me behind a desk somewhere filing papers, soft and invisible. Then I'd remember that folded letter, that he hadn't even paused, that my future was to him as forgettable as a milk run, and I'd whisper in a language he never bothered to learn. "I'm not yours to underestimate, not anymore." When I joined the Defense Intelligence Directorate, they didn't hand me a badge. They handed me a silence. "This isn't a job," my onboarding officer told me, without ever making eye contact. "It's a clearance you wear like a second skin." I understood immediately. I had been wearing that kind of silence my whole life. My official title was Strategic Linguistic Support Specialist. But that was just a smokescreen. In practice, I was assigned to forward operating analysis teams, remote field coordination units, and black site communication cells. My roles changed every quarter. My name never did, because it never appeared. I became a shadow with a voice. 1 month I was in Georgia, parsing intercepted Georgian and Farsi radio exchanges between black market negotiators. The next, I was flown into a shipping port in Croatia to decode layered metaphor in smuggled manifestos from separatist groups. I spent nights in shipping containers with generators and translators who never asked questions. Days listening to voice samples so granular I could distinguish sincerity from sarcasm based on breath placement alone. In Syria, I translated a hostage negotiation involving 5 dialects, 2 shell companies, and 1 man who refused to admit he needed help until I caught a verb shift that meant they were lying about the hostage's location. We pulled out just in time, but my name never showed up on the mission brief. In those early years, I learned something no manual could teach you. Fear has a rhythm, lies have a tempo, regret is heavy in the back of the throat, no matter the language. I wasn't decoding words. I was decoding people. Still back at base, I was the language girl. That's what they called me in hallways. Never Rachel, never even analyst, just the quiet one with the notebook and the ear for ghosts. No one asked where I came from. I preferred it that way. I carried a weapon once during a 3-day extraction in Tunisia. I didn't fire it. I didn't have to. The real weapon was what I could hear, what I could piece together from fragments and frequencies and tones no one else noticed. Even when I got it right, even when my notes prevented an entire unit from walking into a coordinated ambush, there were no medals, no ceremonies, just new coordinates, new voices, new silence. That was fine. I didn't need applause. I needed to know I was right. Because accuracy was my currency, precision my armor, and the absence of recognition that became a kind of shield. What they didn't realize, what even I hadn't fully understood, was that silence, when wielded carefully, can become the loudest force in the room. And I had been sharpening mine for years. The breach happened in Syria. I was embedded with a cultural liaison team outside a disputed corridor near Hamara. The mission was quiet on the surface, coordinate with intermediaries, secure aid routes, confirm evacuation patterns. But underneath, we were chasing something else, a single name hidden in layers of negotiation. An asset with access to the financial spine of a dormant weapons network. We were close, too close. Then a voice came through our secure channel, low-accented but not local. And it said my name, not my code name, not Ghostwalker, Rachel. Every syllable landed like a blow. My name had never existed on field manifests, not even in private logs. I froze. The soldier next to me, Keller, went pale. What the hell? How would anyone out here know that I didn't answer? I couldn't. 30 minutes later, a roadside checkpoint went dark. The fallback house had been stripped. 3 intermediaries disappeared. Then a shot cracked from a ridgeline and took a strip of skin off Keller's arm. I pressed my scarf into the wound while his blood soaked the thread. That night, we were airlifted under blackout conditions, flown out with nothing but suspicion hanging in the cargo hold. At base in Ankara, I wasn't greeted. I was handed a sealed folder and a directive report to containment. Inside the room, there were transcripts, signal traces between a Washington comms node and a clearance node out of Langley. Highlighted in red, my full legal name. They said it might have been a coincidence, a hijacked frequency, a signal distortion, but they didn't believe that, neither did I. The questions came hard. Did I speak to anyone outside channels? Did I leave devices unsecured? Did I transmit any details I shouldn't have? I answered everything calmly, because I had done nothing wrong. But it didn't matter. I was pulled from the field, transferred to a holding post in Germany. No operations, no briefings, just data. Language stripped of context, lives reduced to transcripts I wasn't allowed to annotate. It was exile dressed as protocol. And still I didn't protest. Because somewhere deep in that tangled transmission, I recognized something familiar. The encryption sequence wasn't foreign. It had structure too deliberate to be noise. And something about its signature, it hummed like a voice I knew. I couldn't prove it, not yet. But I remembered how my father once described encryption patterns only betray you when you forget what they sound like. And suddenly, I realized I'd heard this one before. I began pulling threads. Not officially, not through DIA systems, I knew better than that. Instead, I used an old access node from a black market surveillance program I'd helped patch together during a Baltic op 3 years prior. It wasn't traceable, not easily. What I was looking for wasn't a name. It was a fingerprint. And I found one. The breach sequence from Syria, its structure matched a legacy encryption lattice developed under a project codenamed Horizon Echo. That project had been decommissioned years ago, but one name kept appearing in the authorization chain buried in technical policy approvals. Caldwell Henry, clearance level C4, temporary consultancy designation. My breath left me in pieces. My father had worked as a strategic advisor during the early phase of Horizon Echo. I knew that. What I didn't know was that his signature had greenlit the exact lattice model used in the breach that exposed me. Maybe he didn't design the back door. Maybe he hadn't noticed the vulnerability. But he had signed the paper. I kept digging. One contract stood out between the directorate and a vendor called Pinecross Analytics, a shell company listed out of Virginia. The installation date for the encryption mirror, January 12th. The Syria mission began in March. The final signature on the implementation log, Henry Caldwell. I ran the metadata. It had been signed at 2:13 a.m. from a terminal registered to a consultancy suite leased by 3 retired officers. One of them had served with my father in Kandahar. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it wasn't a coincidence either. I remembered something he said to me once after I'd forged his name on a gym excuse in middle school. He'd found out made me run laps until I vomited. Then he stood over me and said, "A man's name is his oath. You don't fake that and expect to walk upright." And now there I was, staring at his name, wondering if he'd meant any of it. I could have reported it then, sent the trail up the chain, but I didn't trust the chain anymore. I knew how whispers worked in intelligence. Some get protected, others get swallowed. So I built a report, not as Rachel Caldwell, as A. Marsh, a dormant identity I'd once used in Moldova during a disinfo sweep. The report was clinical, 8 pages. References, encryption markers, device signatures, no accusations, just a story the data told. I routed it through a narrow intel tunnel into Oversight Compliance Unit 30CU3. They didn't reply immediately, but when they did, it was 3 lines. Patterns confirmed. Quiet escalation initiated. Do not engage. And I understood what that meant. They believed me. Now they just had to make someone else believe it too. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. Plain envelope, government seal, no details beyond a date, time, and location. Red Rock Command Hall, 900 hours. I wasn't listed on the agenda. There was no title next to my name, just a checkbox next to confirmed. But I knew what this was. OCU3 didn't deal in press releases. They didn't make arrests. They orchestrated reckoning with pageantry sharp enough to draw blood. The ceremony was officially to honor strategic contributors to national encryption protocols, a closed-door event, attendance by invitation only. Among the names scheduled to be recognized, Colonel Henry Caldwell, retired. I arrived early, wore the standard uniform, no rank, no ribbon, no insignia. Just fabric, just presence. They sat me 3 rows behind him. He hadn't seen me yet. He looked older than I remembered, but still upright, polished, every crease in place. When his name was called second, he stood with the kind of pride that thought it had nothing left to prove. He didn't know what was coming. The ceremony moved quickly. Vague names, muted claps, tight nods. Then the general stepped forward. General Anders, one of the few who had ever seen me work in the field. He didn't open a folder, didn't clear his throat, just stared at the room like a judge measuring sentence length. "This next recognition is not ceremonial," he said. "It is corrective." The air shifted, chairs tightened. I felt my father shift forward slightly. "We are here to acknowledge a contribution made without without protection, and until recently, without justice." His voice lowered. "There is someone in this room who was once marked, not for failure, but for precision." I saw my father's hand curl around the edge of his program. Then Anders said it. "We need Ghostwalker in the room, that was all. No drumroll, no name." But every senior officer in that hall straightened. I stood. Row 3, seat 4. I stepped into the aisle. My father turned slowly and locked eyes with me. Recognition bloomed too late to be pride, too stunned to be denial. He stood, not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but because he realized every person around him already had. I walked past him. He didn't speak, didn't move, and in that stillness, the silence he'd weaponized for decades finally turned on him. Because silence in the right hands is not absence, it's judgment, and I didn't need a single word to deliver it. 3 days passed, no call, no message, no knock at the door. Then at 2:04 a.m., my secure inbox pinged with a flagged file. No subject, no sender, just a single document titled, "If I Sign." I opened it. One line center of the page. "If I sign a confession, will you go public?" No greeting, no explanation, just that. I didn't reply right away. I didn't scream or cry. I sat with it like I had sat with so many silences before. I thought about what he was really asking. He wasn't asking about guilt. He was asking about control. Would I use this moment to ruin him, or would I walk away intact and invisible as always? At dawn, I wrote back, "No, but I'm not the child afraid of light anymore." He didn't reply. But later that week, I received confirmation from an OCU3 contact that Colonel Henry Caldwell had voluntarily appeared before an internal ethics tribunal. No summons, no order. He just walked in. He said 7 words. I authorized a contractor I didn't vet. He didn't spin, didn't blame oversight. He admitted he fast-tracked an encryption framework 6 years ago based on a colleague's assurance. He didn't review the architecture, didn't question the backdoor logic embedded in the transmission protocol. Or maybe he had, and he chose to let it pass for convenience, for favor, for retirement. When asked if he knew who uncovered the breach, he paused, then said no. But I suspect I owe her everything. He never said my name. But in the official transcript, one sentence was underlined and flagged. "I accept all consequences, but I ask only one thing, keep my daughter's name off the record." That was the closest he ever came to saying he was sorry. He lost his clearance, returned his badges. His name was pulled from consulting registries and removed from encryption task forces. DIA issued no press release. There was no fallout in headlines, just a silent shuddering of legacy influence. A week later, a package arrived at my door. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside was his West Point pin, the one he never removed. Not during surgeries, not during war zones. The one I once reached for at 8 years old only to be told, "This is for soldiers, not spectators." Now it rested in my palm. No note, no justification, just metal and memory. But this time his silence didn't sting. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like surrender. And for the first time, it wasn't a power play, it was a recognition. He had finally seen me, not as the girl who broke formation, not as the daughter who dared to choose language over steel, but as the one who stood in a storm he helped create and didn't flinch. And for once, he didn't tell me to move aside. He stepped out of the way.